And welcome. It is the EPL panel show from American Scouser TV. I don't have an acronym for that like we do on Thursday for ASTV for the Thursday night podcast. So we'll just say super subs here because Timuchin isn't. We have Sully with us and Jake. We have Newcastle and Spurs and Liverpool. It's like a classic top three from 1979 in the old English First Division. Sully, how are you?
Doing well. Good holidays, and just ready for the new year, and hopefully some different results from the boys.
Jake, how are you?
Doing well. Spurs undefeated in 2024, so we're riding that.
You can't argue with that. But what we'll do is we'll go through the games and the results for this last technical match day, even though they split it over 3 days, 4 days, whatever it was. And then we'll talk about our own particular teams, although we'll really be only two conversations, won't it, Sully? But let's look at the first group of results. Chelsea managing a narrow win against Luton, who are doing relatively well. Wolves beating Everton. You got to love that if you're a Liverpool fan. Palace beating Brentford. You don't love that if you're a Liverpool fan. Hodgson is probably still throwing his players under the bus just for conceding the one. Villa still doing fantastic. And then City, that was probably a foregone conclusion as soon as they put their cleats on to go and beat Sheffield United. And then second half of the game, Forest beating United. To me, no surprises there. It's a fantastic thing to see. I'm there for it all day. United losing, hand over fist with Eric Ten Hag. Spurs with a nice win against Bournemouth now, because they do cause problems for teams. Fulham beating Arsenal. We might graze on that a little bit, and then some fantastic six Champions League team beating Newcastle, not without controversy either, Sully. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then West Ham and Brighton in a very typical David Moyes home 0-0 draw, because that's what David Moyes does. He plays to draw, and he's possibly the only person in the history of soccer to do that outside of Jose Mourinho. But let's go first with let's talk about Spurs, Jake, because we've said on the Thursday podcast and on the pre and post matches as well, Big Ange reminds me, even at Celtic, remind me a little bit of Andre Villas-Boas in the sense that he has a way he wants to play, and he's not going to change that way to play depending on the other team. He's not tactical minded in that sense. He might make little adjustments here and there, but the general principles will remain the same. You've had a turbulent time, I think, as Spurs fans since Pochettino was gone, essentially. You had a nice period of consistency and upward progress, and then after that, just boom, could go anywhere, which way. Are you happy with Big Ange, even with whatever foibles he has, and do you think it's going to get better year by year as long as he stays there?
Yeah, I think you calling those times turbulent is an understatement. It was a pretty rough patch that we went through with the manager carousel, but I feel a lot more assured under Ange, and obviously the attacking style of football is kind of what Spurs were built on. And I think a good comparison to AVB. People had some fond memories or times with him when he was manager, and obviously, like all managers before him, it all kind of went south. So hopefully Ange can right the ship for a longer period. And it looks like it, even with all the injuries, that he's, stubborn in his ways. We saw it, the biggest example was way back against Chelsea in that blow-up game. But I think just staying with the same sort of play style, even with half the team being the second string players, it shows that he's just going to stick with it no matter what. And we're still getting results pretty much every other week. And as long as those results are wins and we're getting the 3 points, most every week when we can, it's going to be exciting when we have our full team back.
Sully, in terms of your club almost has the same ambition as Spurs, break into the top four consistently, add a few additions, get a challenge for the league on, like in the way Aston Villa is now, like to be that third team that usually challenges for a bit. If you're looking at Spurs, because we'll get to Newcastle in a bit, but if you're looking at Spurs, are you looking at them and saying, that's where we want to be as well, and we have the resources to do it? Do you look at Big Ange and do you see maybe some comparisons with Howe, who also is a similarly stubborn manager about what way he wants the game to be played? If it may be a little bit more on the defensive side rather than the more attacking side. Are you looking at Spurs as somebody that's a threat to your ambitions as a fan of Newcastle? Or do you think it's going to fall apart, as so many unfortunate Spurs things tend to do? Just as it gets good, the universe snatches it away from you.
Oh, I was thinking about this weekend. The league right now seems like top 5 is lava. You know what I mean? Everybody's not trying to get top 5. Like, as soon as somebody breaks into the top 5, oh, here comes a really bad string of games. The consistency is not there this season for any team. Now, the one thing about Ange, and the comparison to Eddie Howe, and I'll even throw, in honor of Timogen, who's not here, Lego Head into this. With the idea of
his head's made of Lego, by the way.
It is. Oh, it is.
It's actually made of Lego.
The hair doesn't move. The hair never moves. However, I think this is a strength of the Premier League. A stubborn manager can't get it done in the Premier League. You have to be able to consistently change tactics. I think for Tottenham, a difference between Tottenham and Newcastle, I think the league's figured out Eddie Howe. I think the league has figured out what Howe wants to do, and we don't have the players to sort of overcome that sort of obstacle right now. Ange is new on the scene for this season. Teams haven't seen him play a ton. He's got sort of this revamped and a brand new facing Tottenham team. I mean, Tottenham, you prepped for Harry Kane. That was what you prepped for. He's not there anymore. Other guys are going to have to step up. The team looks different. And I think it's one of the problems that Arsenal's having right now. I think teams have figured out Arteta ball and what Arteta wants to do. And that is such a strength of the Premier League. But we'll see what happens. We'll see if Spurs get top 5 this season, top 4. What happens next year? How do you kind of keep this momentum going? Same thing with Aston Villa. Who's Emery? With Emery, I think teams haven't figured out Villa Emery ball yet. I think once they do figure that out, Villa's in trouble. Part of the reason Pep is so great is Pep can switch players out constantly. Pep can go into a transfer window and buy 4 new players and sell off 4 players for millions of pounds. So I think the ever-changingness and need to adapt in the league is going to be very, very interesting. And we'll see if Spurs can continue to adapt.
Sully, do you think that freshness from Ange is one of the things that's helping him this year? And we don't even have a huge amount of time from at Celtic to see what he did, when he had to change things. And his career before Celtic is probably very hard to research if you don't have the means to get like Japanese soccer games. But is that freshness helping him? Or have you seen things that suggest to you as a Spurs fan, do you know what, if people do start to figure out, I think we'll know what he's going to do to change it?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with Sully completely. And one of the things that I'm kind of worried about with Ange is that he tells everyone what he's going to do. And he says, I'm not changing anything. And so if you can figure out how to stop that one thing that he does, then, I mean, that's his one trick. So I hope that it's good enough tactics where he can just continue to be stubborn and, have it not bite us in the ass down the line. But I think that him, coming in fresh from not a top 5 league is definitely helpful because people are not as familiar, and his tactics kind of took the Premier League not by storm, but almost to that extent in the first 10 games. And I mean, it worked at all these, lesser leagues per se. So hopefully, it'll continue to work in the Premier League, but it's the biggest test of them all. It's the best league in the world, in my opinion. And I don't know. I'm nervous as a Spurs fan because it seems those first 10 games, it seemed like too good to be true. And then we played Chelsea and, classic Spurs implosion. So I'm cautiously optimistic that with our full team, we can continue to really play teams off the pitch.
I'll ask you this to you, Jake, and then we'll go on to Sully with it. But is it possible that there's a sort of Bielsa-like quality to Big Ange, in that Bielsa told everybody what he was going to do every week and dared people to try and stop them. And really the only thing that did was the players broke down because it was intense and it was demanding and it didn't stop in training. There was no light training days under Marcelo Bielsa. It was just literally, let's go again. We're just going to play Bielsa ball. What was it? Mortar ball. That's the little game they used to play where the ball never went out of play. Is it possible that Ange will be stubborn, but if he gets access to replacing players as he needs to, as they get more weary and fatigued, that it might actually continue to work and he might be able to build on that?
Yeah, it's definitely a tiring system. And you need the depth to kind of rotate if you're going to play like that for, 50 games a season, whatever it's going to be when we're hopefully in Europe next season. But you got to feel for Bentancur, who's playing with Ange with the club and then going to Uruguay and playing with Bielsa. So it's just running constantly. So I think we're seeing that right now with players maybe not used to running that much and, putting in the effort like 100% all the time. And that's why we've had so many injuries. So something to think about. And hopefully it means that we're going to spend a little bit for some depth in the January and future summer windows.
Sully, in terms of being a Newcastle fan and looking at Spurs, Eddie Howe, I liked Eddie Howe at Bournemouth. I thought he was a very good up and coming coach. And when people were talking about Graham Potter in the same breath, I didn't particularly see it. I thought Potter was good for Brighton, but in the same way that Roy Hodgson was good for Fulham and West Brom. Beyond that, his ideas were probably going to fall apart, which they did at Liverpool. But Eddie Howe just seemed to have that little bit extra about him. However, having said that, he hasn't won any major trophies at any level at all. Do you think that might be a difference maker for how much of an impact Big Ange has had? Because we might say the Scottish Premier League is not a top 5 league, which it's not. Nobody would argue. But the players are also not top 5 quality. So they're still not that much different from the players they play against each week. So you still have to learn to win. You still have to learn how to motivate your team every week to win a trophy, to get to that watershed game. We beat St. Mirren, we're champions. Or we draw against Rangers, we only need 3 more points out of 5 games. Eddie Howe hasn't really been in that position at a top level. Do you think that might be a difference maker that makes Ange Postecoglou's impact on Spurs maybe a little bit better than Eddie Howe's? Because Eddie Howe has all the resources, so they say, in terms of the money. But does he have the wherewithal and the savvy to get that team over the line when it's needed?
I think he does. I mean, he's young. He's early 40s? I don't even know if he's 45. He's a young.
That makes me feel really good, Sully, because I'm 48 this year. Still young.
Well, I'm thinking about Uncle Roy, who is
he's 84.
Yeah, seriously, goodness gracious, he's a bag of dust. But no, I think that is also. I see two sides of it. On one hand, I see Eddie trying to prove his style and trying to prove this is what got me here, and he doesn't have the trophy to be look, my style works. We're not deviating from this because I've got a trophy and none of you have trophies. Ange has a trophy, albeit the Scottish Premier League, which I don't want to undersell. I think the Scottish Premier League is, a lot of respect for it. Not the most prestigious. It's better than the J League, for example, but it's still not one of the top 5. I think having a trophy can lead a manager to being this is how we're going to play because I have won doing this. I think Ange is going to have a harder time adapting a style purely based on pride, whereas I think Eddie Howe could adapt a style because he hasn't won anything yet. I think he might still have sort of that check on his pride where he could adapt. But I think Ange is going to be kind of set in his ways, and it's a matter of now getting the players that can withstand this type of system.
Jake, let's talk about the players at Spurs. Most teams would take this season as a consolidation season if they lost their biggest talismanic player since Jimmy Greaves in the 60s, or maybe Gary Lineker in the 80s. But nevertheless, Harry Kane gone by not just like at the start of summer, but literally what was it, 48 hours before the transfer window closed, leaving absolutely no time to get a replacement like for like. A lot of teams might have collapsed with that, but Big Ange didn't let that happen, did he? He really galvanized that team around the fact that now they had to go and do it. James Maddison, I love James Maddison. I think he's a great player. I think he's I would have liked him at Liverpool, but him and Son had like almost automatically kind of picked up from each other, which was good to see that first 10 games. In terms of the players for Big Ange, does he have what he needs in the key areas, or are you guys still missing a player or two in maybe like a goalkeeper or maybe at left back, somewhere where if you got that player, you go, you know what, we're going to be okay now?
Yeah, I think in our first 11, you have everyone healthy, no Romero or Basuma red cards, and I think we're pretty much there. I mean, with Richarlison now coming into form, which no one could have seen coming because he looked terrible last season. I mean, I would like.
And he's Richarlison.
Exactly, and he could drop out of form like this and just be back to taking his shirt off for offside goals and all that jazz. So I would like maybe just one, like, not like you can't replace Harry Kane. It's not going to happen. But someone that is just a true striker that can be consistent and do what Richarlison's doing now, but do it over a long period of time, and someone you can count on. Because, you know, I like Son's kind of like revival he's having on kind of like the left wing, but then striker every other game sort of hybrid. And Kulusevski has just been a workhorse on the right side and then slotting in that James Maddison role for a few games. So just having that versatility has been nice. Brennan Johnson, he's not there yet, but a lot of potential, also playing off that right side. So I would say maybe someone for Richarlison long term, which I know Richarlison was supposed to be that guy, but I don't see enough from him to say, like, I'm happy with him for the next 5 years or so. But I think it's depth, because I love our center backs, but not having them for a majority of the season has been killer for the team, because you need to have that pace and you need to have that balance of the Romero aggression and the Van de Ven kind of head on his shoulders where Romero doesn't. I think it's just depth, because you look at pretty much every other position. Udogie has been amazing at left back, one of our best signings the last 3 years. Did not see that coming. And then Porro has really come into the right back role, and you know, Pap Sarr has really taken that second 8 role and made it his own. And it's just been so fun to see. And I almost forgot our best player, probably Vicario, who's just saved us so many times, because the way that we play out from the back and the quality that we've had in defense the last 5 or 7 games, there's been so many mistakes, and he's just had to be on his toes and making those saves. So I'd say a true striker that can be consistent and some depth, and that's probably it.
Especially in the 2 centre half positions, because if you're going to play that way that Ange plays, you're going to need like for like centre backs, really. You can't just you can't just get Robert Huth out of retirement and stick him at the back for like, you know, $10 and half a Snickers a week. You really need that depth, like what we kind of try and do at Liverpool, which is to have Matip and Van Dijk and then Konate. They're different players, but they have similar qualities in terms of speed and power. Because if we didn't have that, we're conceding even more goals on the break. Yeah. But in terms of that formula, Sully, are you seeing the same things at Newcastle? Because there was a whirlwind of transfer activity when Eddie Howe took over. But do you think there's still room for improvement in there, or are you happy enough with the squad?
No, I'm finally sort of at the point where I am sick to admit it, but our squad's not good enough. It just simply isn't. I mean, albeit Harvey Barnes has not played a ton this season because of an injury. Tonali, I don't know where Tonali's been. It's just kind of a mystery why he's not playing. So, yeah, we're gonna move on.
Next segment. Yeah.
But yeah, so those were our two biggest transfers, and they've hardly played. And when they were on the field, we were a far different team. Pardon me, Miggy Almiron seems like he's turned back into a pumpkin. You know, we need to revamp the squad. I think Miggy's fine to bring off the bench. I think Joe Willock, actually, never mind. Scratch that. Jacob Murphy, fine to bring off the bench. Those are guys you can win a lot of games bringing off the bench. Lewis Miley, as one of your top subs, you're going to be just fine. Those are guys you can't have playing tons of first team starter minutes. You just can't, and expect to go up the table. I think the shine has kind of worn off, and I think I was just looking at our last results. We have one win in our last
6 games in the league.
Yeah, well, and that's not even counting the cup loss to Chelsea, the Milan loss. Like, the shine's kind of come off, and we have to revamp the roster. We need better players. We need, a lot of people were saying we weren't even at the Man City, who was it, Robinho era. It was their first big signing, right? I'm correct on that. A lot of people were saying we weren't even there last year, and so we were ahead of schedule. Well, now it's time to get to that Robinho level. Bring somebody in. We need some new players if we hope to do anything with the.
Jake, as a Spurs fan, and as we said, almost a comparison between Spurs and Newcastle in terms of new managers and a new future, so to speak. But do you look as a Spurs fan at Newcastle at the embarrassment of financial riches they have access to, that Spurs have been promised season on and season out as long as Daniel Levy has been there, if I remember correctly, and it's never materialised really unless you sold your 2 best players to get that money in the first place? But do you look at Newcastle and as a Spurs fan and go, you know what, you guys should be much higher. You guys should be doing a lot. If we had that money, we'd be fighting for Liverpool and City for the title.
Yeah, I mean, they have the money, but it's not like they've been flashing it, here and there. It's been in small spurts, and I think they were good moves. I think, obviously, that's
probably because Tonali spent it all on bets.
Yikes. But yeah, no, Tonali looked like a good player before the suspension. Isak's a great player, and Harvey Barnes is a great option on the left side. So if you had all their marquee signings, if you will, then they'd be a pretty good team and higher than they are now. So it's just a bummer that they don't have it all the pieces there at once. And I think there's still a lot to come from Newcastle. I think they're being smart about it. They're not just going out and spending and spending and spending, because then you get a reputation and people just drive up prices if you're willing to just flash the cash for whatever player you want and don't negotiate. So I think Chelsea. In a long exactly. I didn't name names, but I think a long-term scheme, it looks good for Newcastle. It's just an off season because they've had so many injuries, and there are other players who were kind of riding a high previously, knowing that the money had come in, the new owners had come in. They're like, we have to play to the highest level or else we're going to lose our spot. I think that's kind of worn off, and the injuries obviously didn't help, and they're kind of seeing that decline because they haven't gone and spent irresponsibly. As for Daniel Levy, He does promise that, and he did spend big at some points in the past. It just wasn't great spending, and that's not really up to him. It's kind of the scouting network. Our biggest signing ever was I don't mean physically, but Tanguy and Ndombele just did not pan out. And Lo Celso was like one of our second biggest signings, and he's only just now, proving that he's a great player for Spurs, although he plays like a 9 out of 10 every time he plays for Argentina, but we'll let that go. So I think it's just spending correctly. And although, Fabio Paratici is maybe a criminal, he did some great scouting, and the players that he's brought in have been fantastic so far. So hopefully we keep with this new style of scouting, and Spurs spend the money on the right players this time.
Let's look at the Spurs game from this past match day. 3-1 to Bournemouth, against Bournemouth, rather. I mean, you guys have, 4 wins in the last 6? But you were coming off a loss, and it's always nice to come back with a home win, especially at this time of year, because it gets so crazy in English football with, a game every 6 hours or whatever the rate happens to be. Did you look at that game and go, if we can get the injured players back, obviously that always helps. But if we can deal with the attrition that comes, I think it's like the next 2 weeks. It's still like FA Cup League, FA Cup League, and then another league. Like they're trying to play catch up for the next few weeks. So I always remember, like, literally from Christmas Eve onwards, it's just hectic in January, and the teams that survive that, the teams that push on. Did you look at that game and did you say, we're going to be okay? We're still going to hit some bumps in the road, but I'm really looking forward to the future for this team.
Yeah, no, I think that a home game versus Bournemouth in the past is usually a formality for most teams, especially Big Six teams, Big Six. So like going into it, you wouldn't think, oh, this is a game, if we win, we're going to build momentum. But Bournemouth, has been taken down to big teams, had some really good form, and Dominic Solanke, looked like a world beater out there. So to have that game and look kind of terrible overall and still win 3-1, it kind of shows that even when we're kind of battered, we are going to beat the teams we're supposed to beat, hopefully. And going into the new year, it's pretty it gives us an optimistic outlook, because unlike Liverpool, who have, I think, 6 games in January, I think Spurs only have 3 games in January. So it's nice that we have a little bit of a reprieve because we're not in the Carabao Cup. And so hopefully we get some players back. Van de Ven's coming back this month. James Maddison maybe the end of the month. So if we can, get
James Maddison hair is another 2 weeks after that. His hair has a different schedule.
It's good hair though. It's good hair.
No, it's good hair.
Yeah. But yeah, I think if we can get through the 2 Premier League matches we have in January, and we don't just absolutely soil ourselves, then we head into February with a refreshed squad, people coming back from African Cup of Nations and Sonny from the Asian games. I think the outlook's great if we can just head into February with a mostly healthy squad.
Sully, in terms of, you are a Newcastle fan, you want to be where Spurs are right now. Are you looking at games like Bournemouth, who they have been tricky for teams? They're not relegation fodder, and they're probably not top 6 contenders when it comes down to the final stretch, but they're a bothersome team. They're one of those teams you just don't want to face away, at least. Are you looking at that and looking, I hope Spurs crap out of this now, and get that 0-0 draw that we so badly need? Or are you looking at it and going, you know what, we should be there. We shouldn't be losing 5 out of 6 games.
That's how I'm looking at it. We got to handle our business. We cannot hope for other teams to do things. We have to win games. I don't see. I mean, Spurs sitting, where are they at right now? Hold on. Sitting fifth on 39. They're 10 points ahead of us. Spurs is not dropping 10 points. We're not going to catch Spurs. That's just not feasible. But yeah, I mean, yeah, we have I think really spots between 6 through honestly 17 outside of that relegation window. 6 through 17 are highly competitive games. And I think I was saying this a couple of weeks ago, that sort of bottom half of the table, they're tricky teams. And that's why the Prem is the best league in the world. You can't just assume that you're going to win every game. You actually have to go out and play the damn match. And that's why we lost to Luton. That's why we gave up a hat trick to Chris Wood. Jake, if you're looking for a striker, I think Chris Wood's a great option. I wish Newcastle still had Chris Wood at this point. But anywho, I think no game can be overlooked at this point. I think a lot of teams are desperate. I think a lot of teams are up for a fight. I think we're going to have a hell of a second half of the season. And the closer we get to April and May, things are only going to heat up even more so than they are.
Now, talk about heating up where Newcastle is concerned. It was Liverpool-Newcastle on Monday. Always a heated up game. Always a game full of goals. We didn't get the 4-3 that we're all used to for the last 30-odd years. But it was an entertaining game nonetheless. However, having said that, it would not be, I don't think, unfair to say that Liverpool essentially dominated the game from start to finish. I think I read it was the highest amount of expected goals in a Premier League game since they started measuring expected goals. Did it worry you in any way, shape, or form? I know there was controversial incidents, especially with the Jota penalty, which is probably a penalty in name only because he could have won Dancing with the Stars with the aftermath of the minimal contact with the goalkeeper. And had it happened against Liverpool, this computer would be in that wall that's right behind it. But nonetheless, it probably was still a deserved result for Liverpool to win the game overall, wasn't it?
Oh, 100%. We were not up for the game. Are you guys getting any feedback?
I'm definitely getting any feedback.
Okay. Yeah. You guys dominated. I mean, that was a Mo Salah career-defining performance. That was when he's on form like that, you're not going to win. I mean, there are two teams going in the opposite direction. Liverpool is ascendant right now. Newcastle is trying to stop the bleeding. We're trying to plug holes on the Titanic. Like at this point, I mean, we didn't look in that game at all. Like the Jota penalty, I'm kind of used to Newcastle being screwed by officials at this point, like in terms of penalty kicks. I wish Alan was here to cry me a river, but he's not. So whatever, moving on. We didn't look up for it. I think Nick Pope's injury is way worse than we thought it was. Now, Dubravka can stop a lot. Like, he is a good keeper.
He had a fantastic game. If it wasn't for him, it probably would have been that 7-1 or 7-2 or something.
But here's the thing I worry about with that. Yes, he is good at the individual saves. I'm wondering how well he can direct a defense, because our defense looked night and day different when Nick Pope was in versus how it looks right now. So I'm wondering, again, he's a class keeper. He can make saves all day long, but I'm just wondering if the chemistry isn't there and the ability to sort of be a field general is not there for Marty Dubs. So we'll see. That injury really hurts. That one is, I think, way worse than people think it is. I don't want to see us bring in De Gea, but like there's a lot of things we did wrong that game. There were very few things we did right. I can't believe we got 2 on the board. That game should have been, like you said, about 7-1. 7-0.
If you guys end up getting De Gea, I'll throw my computer through the wall behind as well, just for you.
I can't do it. I couldn't handle it.
So talking about keepers, and this is for both of you, but we'll go to Sully first. Not to be humble bragging because I'm a Liverpool fan, but you guys said goodbye to Hugo Lloris. Was Hugo Lloris left this week? Yeah. Who am I thinking of?
Hugo left.
Yeah, Hugo left. Yeah. Who was a talismanic keeper for Spurs for so long. I mean, you could see his decline in his last season and a half or thereabouts. But still, when he was on peak performance, he was probably one of the best keepers in England. And as Sully says, sorry, Jake, we'll start with Jake. Sully says the difference between Nick Pope and Dubravka in terms of organising the defence is clearly night and day. And I've liked Nick Pope for a long, long time as a goalkeeper. In terms of the importance of that position, Jake, do you think Spurs needs you can be happy with your goalkeeper now, but we were also happy with Karius for a long time. And then Alisson came along, and then every goalkeeper that we thought was going to be the next Bruce Grobbelaar went out the memory window because Alisson was the real deal. Is it important for both Spurs first, and we'll talk about Newcastle, to get that piece of the puzzle right before anything else?
Yeah, I think the way each team plays, it's heavily reliant on the goalkeeper in different ways. Spurs, it's playing from the back, and you need someone that can play, use their feet in this modern age, and be like a 11th outfield player, which we have in Vicario, who's one of the best goalkeepers in the Premier League with his feet, outside of Ederson maybe. So I think that is a huge part of our game, and that's why Hugo never got back in the squad, and that's why Fraser Forster hopefully never gets back in the squad. They lack that quality. They're great shot stoppers.
That's not even for goalkeeping reasons. It's just because he's Fraser Forster.
The man's huge. That man is the biggest man I've ever seen in my life. But yeah, so it's huge for Spurs to have someone that can actually do that. And I loved Hugo, even the last season and a half, when he had more errors than brilliant saves, which, not a good ratio. But I loved him throughout the years, and he saved our ass, more than a handful of times. And it's just a great captain for 9 or 10 years he was captain, or probably 7 years he was captain. So definitely going to miss him, but happy with Vicario. And for Newcastle, I mean, Pope is just the intangibles about him is what they're missing, as Sully alluded to. And Dubravka, he's a fine keeper, great deputy, but just is not the same. And you're seeing that with the stats alone, looking at how many goals are being conceded by Newcastle, and that's not from lack of saves or lack of trying from Dubravka. It's from that back line looking like they've never played together.
Let me ask you both this as a Liverpool fan, to get different perspectives, because we all live in our own little soccer supporting bubbles a lot of the time. If you're facing Liverpool, if they're on your agenda, and you know that Nunez is fit, and you know that Diaz is fit, and Jota is fit, and Salah is fit, and Elliott's fit, and Trent is fit, and Gakpo is fit, and then maybe Gravenberch has found his shooting boots again. But essentially, do you look at that attack and go, we better score 6 goals, because they're going to try and score 5, no matter how many no matter whether we score first? Because we've talked about this on our own podcast, like just about Liverpool, is the mentality of this team this year has surprised even us as Liverpool fans, because we went behind so often in the first half of the season and still managed to grind out a win, which they always say in the cliched way is the mark of champions, but we've only done it because we've got such a potent attack. Does that scare you guys as non-Liverpool fans if we're facing that team? And if so, where do you see the chinks in the Liverpool armour where there might be like a chance to get a win? We'll go with Sully first.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest one is going to be what Darwin Nunez decides to show up on a daily basis, and not just in terms of him, missing sitters like he did against Newcastle, but he's a red card liability. He is a liability to get Liverpool down a player in a high pressure situation. I mean, when he's on, he's a world beater. He's unstoppable. The minute that switch flips, there's trouble. Look out. It could be very problematic. The other one I would be concerned about would be, and this might be kind of a hot take, but Gakpo not getting goals. I think Gakpo needs to score. You can't rely on Salah to have a performance like that, even though it seems like he continually does it. You can't rely on that type of performance every single day in and day out. He's got a couple of those in the tank all season. He's going to be old reliable, but old reliable breaks down every now and then. So, and Jota's obviously not going to get soft ass PKs like that every single day of the week. But yeah,
I don't know. He'll give it a good try.
Yeah. He'll do his damnedest. Yeah, I think whatever Agent of Chaos Darwin Nunez decides to do, or Gakpo needing to get goals, I think those are the two biggest issues for Liverpool's attack at this point.
Jay, do you see anything in comparison with what Sully is saying about Salah, and maybe that we could become reliant on him in the same way that if Harry Kane didn't score sometimes in some seasons, Spurs just didn't score?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good comparison because both, are equally deadly in front of the net and also can create. And
people forget that as well. Harry Kane was a very good creator.
Absolutely. And it's kind of the same trajectory where Salah really started as a goal scorer from that right wing. And now he's just one of the best passers in the attacking third in the Premier League. So it's a great transition to being a more well-rounded player. And when he's, on his game, he's unstoppable. So I think there is a hazard of being reliant on one player. I will say, based off the people that you listed, and you also, forgot like McAllister and Curtis Jones, who's been in good form. You just have a plethora of options. So it's just whether or not you pick the right combination and they decide to show up. It helps when you have you're playing Liverpool and you have VAR on your side, ruling out onside goals. But if you don't have that,
I don't know. They also ruled out handballs against Arsenal. But to be fair, like when you're managed by a Lego head, you're probably going to be a bit more generous to that team than anybody else.
Yeah, the guy
especially before Christmas, and you want a Lego set.
He was dribbling in the box. It was actually impressive. I thought I was watching basketball for a second. But yeah, I think the way to get at Liverpool is to kind of frustrate them with possession. If they're out of possession for too long and you work it through their midfield, which especially earlier in the season was kind of like makeshift, still trying to like figure out what the right pairing was. I think that's where you saw some teams have success earlier on. Now they've got it figured out and they look like the most dangerous team in the Premier League, if not Europe. So I think, keep the possession. You can't lose it in dangerous areas unless it falls to Darwin, who's going to miss it. I think I saw a stat that he has 3 goals from 21 big chances, which is the worst conversion rate in the Premier League. So,
it's still better than Mario Balotelli when he was at Liverpool, to be fair. He had 19 shots
not a high bar.
That's true, yeah. Be a high trampoline, though, it's Mario Balotelli.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, just keep the ball away from their big players like Salah and try to keep possession in their half as much as possible. And the chances dwindle. And if you have pacey center backs and fullbacks, then all the better, because you're going to be countered a bit if you're trying to hold possession that long. So it's tough. The answer is it's tough. Not a lot of teams, especially in the second half of the season, if all your players stay healthy, not a lot of teams are going to figure it out. And there's a chance that if Manchester City continues to look kind of average and they don't have a huge boom once De Bruyne is fit and Haaland is fit, then you could see Liverpool walk to this title. But, I would love to see it be very competitive down the stretch.
Let's move on to something we can all agree on, which is the recent downturn of Arsenal and the not so recent downturn of Manchester United. We'll start with Manchester United. Sully. It delights me no end, not just because I'm a Liverpool fan, but because I grew up amongst a lot of Manchester United fans back in Ireland. And when they weren't winning anything, they were okay. And then they suddenly won the 1993 Premier League in inaugural one, and then couldn't shut up about it for the next 33, 4, 2 years, whatever it happens to be. What is going wrong at Manchester United? Because it's gone over successive managers now. They've torn so many corners. They're UPS drivers. at this point. Does it delight you to see the fall backwards, and do you know why they're falling backwards? Have you got any clues for the Manchester universe as to why their team is so bad these days?
Oh, it brings me the utmost joy. Like, I don't think you're a human being with a soul if you're not happy when Manchester United loses. I think kind of going back to our goalkeeper discussion, I think a big problem has been instability at the keeper position. I mean, last year, De Gea was sort of, a stalwart for Man U. Fans jumped on him. His confidence wasn't there last year. This year, a lot of their problems can be traced right back to Onana. Onana kind of encapsulates the issues with Man United. Like, that's a big problem. Just sort of the lack of focus, lack of any cohesion. Just sort of playing chaotic. They've spent poorly. Rasmus Holland just got on the board, like finally scored a Premier League goal a couple weeks ago, but they're just not good. They're not a well-constructed squad, and that's really all there is to it. I would say Man U fans might say, we've got injuries also, but you don't. You spent poorly. You bought a lot of bad players that were overpriced. You overpaid for them. And I think you need to jettison a bunch and kind of start from scratch. I do think this also just highlights, Newcastle losing to Forest was a quality loss. I think this shows the real strength of Nottingham Forest. So I'm not going to jump too much on that. But yeah, I mean, there's problems across the board. There's problems at every single level of that organization.
Jake, how do you feel about the Man United downturn? Because Spurs that were always a classy side, like they always had class about them, regardless of what they were doing in the league. But United kind of always had that pretend class. They were like the flash, like Chelsea were in the mid 2000s. They had the money. They always had the money, but they weren't winning the trophies. As a supporter of a proper classy club, does it make your heart smile of a morning as you're eating your oatmeal to know that Manchester United are even worse run than the worst time Spurs were run?
Yeah, no, it does make me happy. I am a human with a soul. So it's just, if they were, nicer people and like looked like genuinely good lads out there playing, I'd feel a little bad for them. But there's just not a lot of good eggs in that team. And when your captain is Bruno, it's just like, what kind of example are you looking at? He's, never really shown the best qualities of, captain, I suppose. So it starts at the top. Ten Hag is fine.
Or an adult.
A weird dude. Yeah. Or an adult.
Exactly. He's an adult either.
And then it goes to your captain. Obviously, you can't really say anything bad about Rashford off the pitch as a person, but someone like him, when he gets in bad form, it gets into his head, and he just cannot find that form again. So you mix that up with some Anthony and Garnacho on the wings, who just not likable people and just bad attitudes in that dressing room, cannot be a good dressing room to be a part of. And you have someone like Scott McTominay holding the pieces together somehow a little bit. You know how far you've fallen when McSauce is your best player at sometimes.
In terms of talking about captains and then switching over to Arsenal, it was a thing we talked about in the post match there the other day. About how actually it was Monday night, about when he was made captain at Arsenal, Odegaard. I didn't think it was the smartest move because he was young. He's a creative player. He's not somebody you look to for leadership. Is Arsenal a leaderless club right now? Have they been getting by far too much solely on their technical prowess? And then once, as I said earlier, once that's been found out, once Arteta Ball has been found out, not only is there not a tactical change to cope with that, but there isn't, like, let's say, not to give that guy credit because I hate giving him credit, even though he played for Ireland, but there isn't a Roy Keane type on that team to bash heads together and say, look, if we have to be muddy and dirty for a bit, we're going to have to get muddy and dirty, but this is how you win games.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. I'd like to see Arteta mix it up, give the armband to Kai Havertz for a little bit, just see what happens, just for giggles. But yeah, I like Odegaard as a leader, but yeah, other than him, there's not a ton of other players who I would say, take over. Like Arteta, don't talk to the team. I got this. I think Martin Odegaard doesn't really fit that either. I think he lets his play speak for itself. But he seems like kind of a quiet, kind of timid guy. And they don't make a lot of Roy Keanes anymore. They don't. That mold has been broken for a few years.
Boy, Roy Keane.
Yes, intentionally. He threw it at Alex Ferguson. But you do need somebody like that, and I would agree. Arsenal does not have anybody like that at this moment, and I don't know if Arsenal can go to the trenches if they need to. I think they would get chippy. I think they would get stupid in terms of their tackles. But yeah, I don't think they have. They're like Arteta. They got to stay clean and polished all the time. So I think they could use somebody like that. Who that player is, who steps up to be that player, I think remains to be seen.
Gabriel, maybe in defense. I think he could be a leader. I know it's I wouldn't go changing captains. The captain's still at the club and plays every game. I don't think that sets a good tone for the team. But I think maybe, not officially captain-wise, if you can see someone like Gabriel, who plays in the spine of the team, step up and be a leader, I think maybe someone you can turn to.
Jake, as a Spurs fan with your greatest rivals Arsenal, everybody was talking about them challenging City for the league, even up till about November. Liverpool weren't even mentioned in a lot of the conversations in the British media, at least. But how happy are you to see them take that backwards fall and then lose to Fulham of all teams? Like Marco Silva's doing a good job of Fulham, but still, you would expect a so-called league contender to beat Fulham, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's pretty sweet to see their quote-unquote title-challenging side fall in the last 3 or 4 games, whatever it's been, and Spurs, who are kind of banged up and just scraping by, just be 1 point behind them. So I think if I were one of the two sides, I'd rather be Spurs at the moment, because the trajectory is there. We're only in our first year of our revolutionary manager, and they're in their 4th year, 5th year, whatever Arteta's been. So I don't know. I think the trajectory is in our favor, and I usually don't mind myself with what Arsenal's doing, but it's just the cherry on top when they're not doing well. So to end 2023 with a Spurs win and an Arsenal loss at the exact same time, it was pretty much the perfect ending. And if we can keep that trend going into this new year, I'm not going to be mad about it.
For Sully, in terms of Eddie Howe, he's a good technical manager, but let's just say, for want of a better phrase, he lacks personality, which seems to come from the assistant a lot of the time. Big Ange is a fantastic personality. You could see players rallying around him. Klopp obviously has charisma coming out of his backside. But Arteta really, it's not just a mocking of his hairstyle. Arteta really just looks like a mannequin on the sideline, doesn't he? You can't be inspired by somebody who looks like he's more concerned about not getting mud on his shoes than he is about whether his team's winning or losing. Are you happy to have a managerial partnership? Let's call it what it really is, where somebody at least has the charisma to get players going. Whereas with Arsenal, it's Arteta, and if he's not looking like GQ model of the year on the sideline, pointing to his watch and out to the ocean like that. Where's the inspiration coming from?
I love Jason Tyndall and Eddie Howe, and I always think they actually look like the yin yang symbol. Eddie Howe hasn't seen the sun in several years, and Jason Tyndall sleeps in a tanning bed. The analogy works, but I think. I think you were right, and the Arsenal team really embodies what Arteta does, in terms of their play style. And when you have sort of like that cult of personality, that single figure head, that's where problems arise. I think back to like Brian Clough and Peter Taylor, like those guys needed each other. Clough couldn't win without Taylor, and Taylor couldn't win without Clough. You needed those two guys together, and I mean, look at all the great partnerships. Ferguson and Keane, Ferguson and Rooney. Those are players we're talking about, but when you have two people sort of at the top sharing that vision, you can divide and conquer at that point. So I think Arteta not having a second behind him and running a lot of young lads. Like Saka is the obvious choice, but you can't hand that over to Saka yet. He's far too young to be a team captain. So I even before or early on with Tyndall and how Jamal Lascelles, like he's the club captain. He wears the armband when he plays and Trippier's out, but he's the club captain. Last season, he got 3 yellow cards from the bench, getting on referees, interfering with throw-ins. He was part of the play. He was part of it. And you need guys like that. And Arsenal, they're from North London. They don't want to get their fancy shoes all dirty. They're not
Jake,
the hard-working, honest side of North London. They're not from there. They're not from there, Jake.
But Jake, all the same though, it must, even as biased as you would be as a Spurs fan, it must give you more encouragement to see not only that Big Ange will stick up for his players and motivate his players on the pitch, but he also sticks up for them off the pitch. And he takes no nonsense from the press. And he didn't do that at Celtic either. He has his own way of dealing with questions he doesn't want to answer. In the same way, say, Klopp just laughs at the journalist whenever they ask him a question he doesn't like. But it must be better to have a personality there, even if they're not the best coach individually. That's not to say that Eddie Howe or Big Ange aren't good coaches or Jurgen Klopp, but they can lead their team. If you're a Spurs fan looking at Arsenal and you're looking at the top, you must be pretty happy about what the next 5 years might lead to, because Arteta has the style, but not the substance. And you could see him going to City and failing, or going to Barcelona and failing. Whereas Big Ange's next step, it's going to be a big one up, isn't it, from Spurs?
Yeah, and I hope that's not for some time. I hope that he has a good amount of success here and stays and completes the job. But I think the manager is so important, because it's the kind of the first face that someone sees when looking at a club and thinking about a club. And I'd rather have someone like Big Ange out there representing Tottenham than someone like Arteta. And it's just like the personalities there, his relationship with the media, with the team, and even with the higher ups like Daniel Levy. I think there's some good chemistry all around. And I mean, we talked about it earlier this season on the panel about him just being more likable than other coaches, and opposition sides being like, I don't like Spurs per se, but Big Ange seems like an all right guy, and I've no quarrels with him. So I don't know. I really like the persona that he has and how he treats the club, and he's not bad mouthing the club like Conte used to. So it's a fresh change of pace, manager-wise, and yeah, he definitely, I think, has a higher ceiling, although being quite a bit older than Arteta. But I think he has the right stuff, if you will, to coach at some of the biggest clubs in the world, if if you don't consider Tottenham one of the biggest clubs in the world, the few people that don't consider Tottenham the biggest clubs in the world.
So let's move on just for the last section. And I know there's probably different sections that are done each week, but I don't know them, so we're doing this one instead. We're probably going to talk about Liverpool Arsenal in the FA Cup tomorrow night in the Thursday pod. So let's talk about Newcastle Sunderland. It's a derby. It's a big game. People in America who are maybe new to the Premier League and maybe haven't paid any attention to Sunderland will probably not know just how big of a game Sunderland Newcastle is. Sully, how are you feeling about this game? Is it one you want to win, or are you more focused on what you can do in the league?
So my biggest concern is it's played at the Stadium of Shite. I'm really bummed out about that, but it's the first time we played Scumderland in 9 years. This is the biggest game of the season for us. We have to win this game. There were a few years there before Sunderland got relegated. God bless their souls, but not really. They would beat us. They would be way below us in the table, and they'd show up and beat us. We have to win this game. Yes, PSG, that was an awesome game. Going to Europe, all these things, that's awesome. We have to beat Sunderland. We have to. If Eddie loses to Sunderland, I think there are real questions that have to be asked about his tenure. And it sucks that, we're putting so much pressure on him for an FA Cup game, but this derby hasn't been around in almost a decade. It's a must-win game. There's no other way to say it. It's a must-win.
Just in terms of if the result goes against you, what does that mean for Eddie Howe for the rest of the season? Because it will put a big blot on his copybook, wouldn't it?
That's a huge blot. I think that is going to be something Amanda Stavely needs to really take a look at and assess where we go with Eddie, because you have to beat Sunderland. You simply have to. There's no other way to put it. We are a Premier League side. We have been a Premier League side. We were just in the Champions League. We cannot be going and losing to a team like Sunderland. You can't do it. I have 6:45 on Saturday morning is going to come real quick, but by God, am I going to be up and yelling in my house? I hope my wife has earplugs, because that game is going to be rocking. And I would
I say that same thing every time it's my anniversary.
Yeah. And I also just really hope that there's not too much fracas outside the stadium. This is a derby that gets physical. This is a violent clash,
especially if you're a horse.
Yes, seriously. Yeah. Thank God Peter Crouch isn't playing. But so we'll see. But it has to be a must-win. I think Eddie's coaching for his job with this game.
Jake, Spurs and Burnley, but it's at White Hart Lane. White Hart Lane? Yeah, I'm so behind the times now. But how are you feeling about that game? Because Burnley will probably be more concentrated on the relegation battle, so you might end up playing against half of their first team. But you would like Big Ange to go far in the competition, wouldn't you? To get to a final of the FA Cup, maybe even win it, would be such a great thing for him.
Yeah, and especially after making so many changes in the Carabao Cup against Fulham, and that leading to us, crashing out. I think we got to take this one a little more seriously, especially with such a light schedule in January, which is nice, and a lot of options to rotate with people leaving, and obviously the injury crisis. So I think we're going to put out a pretty strong side, and we should just go for it and put it to bed in the first half, and then maybe make those changes, get some academy players on in the second half. But I don't think you can start with a fully rotated squad, even if that's possible. I don't know if we have enough people to fully rotate a squad. But yeah, take it seriously. I think everyone else has the same mindset as me as Spurs fans. That the FA Cup's kind of been a big part of our history, especially. So I would like to go far in that. And I I've been watching a little bit of Sunderland this year, and I think that they're going to really give it to Newcastle. Jack Clark, former Spurs player, I think is going to run your defense in circles. And I think it's going to be not a traditional Premier League weekend of games, but I think the magic of the FA Cup is going to give us some fun games.
Just one last thing before we wrap up on that, because for me, obviously being a dirty foreigner over here in these shores, but having grown up, despite being Irish, with the English game, the FA Cup really was. It's really hard to say to explain how special the FA Cup was. FA Cup final day over in England. The BBC had the rights for it for so long, and they literally made the whole day about the FA Cup. And they used to do things where they'd go on the buses with the players, and they'd go from wherever the players' hotel was to Wembley State, the old Wembley Stadium. And they just made such a big deal of it. But does that magic transfer to American soccer fans? Because apart from maybe March Madness, there isn't really a competition like it over here, is there, among the native American sports, Sully?
So the NBA actually put in an in-season tournament this year for the first time. I loved it. I thought it was great. There were a lot of guys. I think it was $500,000 for every player who won the who on the team that won. A lot of the guys on the Indiana Pacers, that was something like a quarter of their paycheck if they had ended up winning. So I think there is the potential for it. You also think like college football, in-state rivalries or the rivalry trophies when you play, a derby. I always think of, I went to the University of Minnesota. Minnesota has the Little Brown Jug with Michigan. We've got Floyd of Rosedale with Iowa, Paul Bunyan's Axe with Wisconsin. It's a little bit of extra. But no, and especially for a team that has not won the Premier League, especially for a team that has not sniffed a Champions League. As a Newcastle fan, oh my God, if we won the FA Cup, that'd be incredible. That's a trophy. You have to start somewhere with your trophies. So I think while it might not seem that big to a lot of fans who are, your classic plastic Chelsea, Man U, Arsenal, sometimes Liverpool, sometimes
there are plastic Liverpool fans
no.
now because we've had some success.
Right, City. Those are fans that you didn't earn it. Like you didn't earn the this trophy. You don't know what it means to not win a trophy for so long, and now you've got something. So I think for a lot of teams that are not in your traditional top six, I think the FA Cup still means a hell of a lot.
Jake, for you, like the magic of the FA Cup, part of it rather is the fact that in the draw, anybody can face anybody, and Manchester United, Liverpool, Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea, City could be drawn against Forest Green and potentially lose to Forest Green if it's a wet and windy Saturday afternoon at Forest Green's bog that purports to be a pitch, but it's just painted green mud for that particular day. There isn't, my impression as a non-American is that American sports aren't built for that. American sports are built to keep, just like this Super League that they're proposing in soccer, to keep the best teams playing against the best teams. And so you know what you're getting every year. The idea of an open cup, I think, only exists in the MLS. I don't think there's an NFL Open Cup or an NBA Open Cup, is there? So the closest thing is probably college sports then, because you can get from, or it's still Division 3 and Division 2 and Division 1 though, isn't it? So you get into divisional things.
I think the closest comparison you can have to a Big Six team playing a fourth or fifth tier side in England is maybe the 1 seed versus the 16 seed in March Madness. Virginia losing to UMBC or whoever it was 4 or 5 years ago. So it's different in the U.S., but I love it that can happen regularly in the FA Cup. And, the upsets happen all the time. Colchester and Wickham come to mind for Spurs in the last 5 years. heartbreakingly so. And then we played away to 7th tier Marine 4 years ago. And obviously won 7-0, but it's just they got to, play against a big Premier League club, and they're 6 divisions apart, and that's just it means a lot more. And Americans, try to have a grasp on it, and I can only have as much of a grasp on it as an American can. But it's such a great tradition, and I don't think it should be overshadowed by the league or even Champions League. I think it's a very prestigious and historic tournament, and it should be taken seriously by all clubs.
So just before we go quickly, we can't include our own teams that we support. So if it's not going to be your own team that you support, Sully and Jake, who do you think is going to win the FA Cup?
I'm looking at the matches right now.
So Liverpool play Arsenal, is that correct?
We play Arsenal on Sunday.
Okay, so not Arsenal. It's gonna be someone dumb. It's gonna be like Manchester United after all this,
I have a feeling if it's obviously we can't pick our own teams, but if it's not going to be Liverpool or City, if they decide they want to go for another Champions League or something like that, and then play a second string. I have a feeling Spurs might do. I think Big Angel will take this one more seriously than he took the League Cup, because that one trophy would be so. It'd be such a good thing to walk into the board at Spurs at the end of the season and go, "I got one for you. Give me the cash, and I'll get you another." Whereas if he goes in, they go, he got knocked out by Fulham, got knocked out by Marine again. What's going on here, Ange? But yeah, so Manchester United, we don't want that to happen. So who's your pick?
I could see Villa. Making a strong case.
And Emery is a good cup manager if you go by Sevilla.
Yes, he is. I could see Fulham making a run. West Ham is in form. Those are 3 teams to not write off. My dark horse, I'm gonna go with Aldershot Town. They're the they're my Tonali pick of the week.
Tonali pick of the week is Aldershot Town. I'll go for that. I'll buy that for $1 as the movie says. Good odds. So with that said, just remains to say for me, first of all, thank you for having me for this week, sitting in, I wasn't standing at all for the entire episode. For Tamuch, and it was great to meet you both, and I hope we get to chat again at some point in the future. And it'll be, I'm sure, back next week for the proper show with the proper people, i.e. not me. I'm getting kicked out of American Scouser TV after tonight, and I do apologize. But no, it was great talking to you guys, and we will see everybody next week. And for American Scouser TV, we have our social media. Make sure that you're following us on the YouTube and on the Facebook and the Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter, MySpace if you have it, Bebo if you could find it anywhere in your laptop. All of them, smash that like and subscribe button, or as we say on Thursday, tap it gently because we're the older lads, and it's a bit loud for us otherwise. But other than that, just because it's me, because it's today, thank you, Sully. Thank you, Jake. Have a great week and good luck to your teams this weekend. But for everybody else, here's the 70s porn.